All right, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name's Jennifer Britton, and it's good to see several of you live for our second January 2022 call. Really important topic today, which is creating an effective proposal. So if you are a group coach, if you're a team coach, if you're doing any sort of facilitation or even consulting work related to your role as a coach, chances are you're getting regular requests for proposals. It is pretty standard practice in a lot of organizations, whether it's for-profit, not-for-profit, public sector, to have sort of a 3 proposal rule. So when they go out to find a vendor, the funder, the requirer, usually asks for 3 different organizations to respond as a minimum. So nailing this is really sort of a key skill set, which is why after many years of not doing this, but having requests for it, we decided we'd do today's topic, which is creating an effective proposal. I'm framing it in the subset of as a group or team coach. And I want to share with you 6 different steps that you will want to go through. Now, of course, my process might be different, a little more different than some of yours, but these are really the 6 stages of any proposal. And I say that as we step into year 20 of business. And I always thought I was good at writing proposals until my executive editor told me 10 years ago, Jennifer, we loved your first proposal for effective group coaching so much that we share it with new prospective authors. So obviously my years of grant writing paid off for the United Nations and other international organizations. And so I continued to do this. In fact, it's only January 23rd already this year. In the last 2 and a bit weeks of being back to work, I've already had 4 proposal requests. A lot of those are still out in the ether. So again, I want to just share sort of tricks of the trade with you. And I've even, in my hope of 2024 being of continued value, done a 1-pager. So you may or may not know that we have moved the group coaching ins and outs blog out of the old Blogspot ecosystem, which I loved so much since 2005, but it was getting a bit dated. And it is now over at our groupcoachingessentials.ca. So to make it really easy, I just put a QR code. Hopefully this QR code will take you to today's post that I just did in the last 10 minutes. Eventually it will have today's recording attached to it, but you can go and without giving us your information, scan that QR code, download this creating group and team coaching proposals document. So you are the beta test. I hope someone can give me a thumb up if you go there right now. Karen, it's downloading okay. Jay, awesome. So really want to, again, we are a one-stop shop for all things group and team coaching. And as really sort of one of the originators in this field, we want to continue to provide value for you, whether you're new to Potentials Realized, an alumni of our programs, or a current student in both our group and team coaching certification processes. We really want to help you be successful because the more coaches are doing better work, it raises everyone up. So I want to share with you today these 6 stages as we get started. Want to bring your voice into the room. And what would be great to know is just what's your biggest question around proposals? Let us know in chat what's your biggest question. As I said, my intent today in the next 25 minutes, 24 minutes, is to really take you through these 6 steps, which you can apply for group and team coaching. You can apply in many different contexts. So as you're doing that, I want to just start our first stage by, as with anything in coaching, it's really critical that we understand the request, right? What is being asked for? And I'm going to just fade back here because we do really want to use our coaching skills to inquire what the request is. What has led to the request and what will success look like? So literally, whether you're sitting down over the phone, over Zoom, face-to-face, through an email, you'll really want to get some detail from whoever has made this request. Talk a little bit about what has led to this request. What would you like this to look like at the end of this project or this day or this process? What will happen? And what's important about this? It's really important that we take some time to find out what's important. And also, what's at stake if things don't change? So I'm going to share some real-time examples just to give this some context. First of all, why I start here is because one of my first biggest contracts when I was starting out this business almost 20 years ago came from one of these three-part or three request, throw your hat in the ring, we're contacting you, could you do this work for us? And it was for a team retreat with an organization that I wound up doing several years of work with. They wanted me to come down on site, meet with them, learn about the request. I was all good with that. And so I sort of prepared. I figured, I would ask a few questions. And as I step into the room, there's like a whole panel of people. And I said, as an organization or a hospital, as a hospital, we need to go out and tender requests. We've asked some of the big consulting firms of this city, and we also wanted to invite you. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? I've been in business for like 6 months and I'm just Jennifer Britton. But I figured I'd do what I do best, which was get curious and ask questions. So I asked some of these questions. What's led to this request for a team retreat? What do you want to have happen during that retreat? What's worked in the past? What hasn't worked in the past? And why I was successful and why I wound up working with this organization for so many years was because, as the operations manager always said, Jennifer, you listened to us. You asked us questions. You asked questions we hadn't even thought about. And to us, that demonstrated, your unique interest in this project. So lean into your curiosity, right? As coaches, we are always asking questions. So even if there is a consulting request on the table, really get curious about what is the frame, what is the context within this request. And again, I think, we have some comments here. I'm just going to pull in as well as we go through this first of 6 stages. Are a couple of really good detailed questions, like how detailed should the proposal be? And in fact, I think that's a question we want to ask from the very start, from this first meeting. What would be useful for me to send to you? Are there any certain elements that you would like included in a proposal? And I'm actually going to go through a checklist that we share in our Incubator and our Coaching Biz Growth Lab programs. I want to share that with you at a very high level so that you can think about some of the elements you could even start pulling together today. So there's that question of how detailed should a proposal be? Karen's asking, as a newer business, what have you found that can help me best stand out other than price? So Karen, to your question, I think being curious, demonstrating interest. If you have done work in this area, which may or may not be the case, see if you can share a case study or two. And even if you haven't, which is the situation with this hospital that I share, I was able to talk about work that I had done in my former world of work. So I was able to talk about retreat work, what I used to do, what was important for me as a facilitator, and then again, lean heavily into the questions for them to get them started thinking. Because part of my philosophy is, out of every conversation, I want people to leave probably a little bit more clear or inspired, regardless of not if they're going to hire me, right? Business comes around, and I think we often forget that. If people like your style, they're going to hire you. Even if they don't like your style, they may refer you on. If they don't like your style, that's it. And that saves a lot of time from like really not being in the running for certain things. Because I will say proposal development can take a lot of time. And there are initiatives like sometimes public sector that may take like days of your time. So you've also got to always weigh out, are you ready to put your hat in the ring? And this is where, again, I think you can start building out your own proposal elements. I'm going to share some of those elements as we go and really look at it. So we also have another question of, I'm curious about sending proposals on my own initiative without a request. I've been doing that with people within my network. And I think that's something you'll want to weigh out. Are people open and receptive to that? Does it send a different message than is intended? I think outreach networking is at all times important, and you'll want to really weigh out, like, do you go as far as doing a proposal, or do you spend that time building out some of these components like case studies, which could be a case study page on a website. One of the things we'll be updating this year, because it's been about 5 years since I've done it, is update our case studies of different work pieces. And you can find those case studies over at our potentialsrealized.com site. Jay's also thinking along the same lines as Karen. So again, you'll want to think about, is it as full-blown as a proposal, or do you have like a rack card? Do you have a, this is what we're offering, this is our focus? In the digital space, right, in different countries, you have to be very careful. In countries like Canada, we have a very stringent spam law. So even if we're just one-offing an email, we might actually be charged under our CAN-SPAM laws for unsolicited contact. So this is where networks are definitely the best way to go. Maybe through LinkedIn, having a virtual coffee with people. I think you do want to, preface any sort of business piece with a conversation and a relationship. Harleen is asking, are there any examples of formats of proposals? And I'm going to share that with you in this checklist. Again, we go into depth in this in Coaching Biz Growth Lab and our incubator programs, but you'll be able to figure out some of these key areas. And Harleen's also asking, do you highlight any terms of working in a proposal or at a later stage? So understanding the request is in fact asking, what would be the process here? In some organizations, once a proposal is accepted, it then goes to a statement of work. Sometimes the vendor, not the vendor, but the actual requester will ask for you as the vendor to do that statement of work. Just recognize this can take a lot of time. So you're going to want to really negotiate according to how much bandwidth do you have. I never want to get stuck in the loop of months-long legal processes. I'm not a legal expert. I do not want to have to get intact with the legal department because that's going to take a lot of time. So you will also need to weigh out these elements in your journey as a group or team coach. And only you can make that decision in terms of how much time is actually being requested in this. So first stage is understand your request. And I hope that you're getting clear on some of those questions that you could ask. I think second stage, what is it that you can offer, right? Is this something that they want a customized element? Is it something like, and again, as coaches, everything is custom because we're always designing from them. But we also want to make sure that we're clear. Is this one-on-one? Is this group? Is this team? Does the organization have clarity around the distinctions between group and team coaching? Right. Last night, I was speaking to graduate students at the Royal Roads University. They had me come in and speak to them as a guest speaker. And, one of the biggest questions, which I always see is, what's the difference between group and team coaching? So are we clear? Is the client clear on what they're asking for? We need to make sure that the definitions we're using align with the definitions they use. Another hospital I wound up working with years later, in this first meeting with the sort of committee, if I could call them that, it was a much bigger piece of work. It was very successful. It won awards globally, nationally. But we realized in that first meeting that what they were calling coaching and mentoring were actually different than what we call coaching and mentoring. And so it's really important that you get clear on what you can offer. So listen in, think about what they're asking for. You might also have multiple meetings if it's a bigger initiative to really think about what are the additional supports that are going to make this initiative, the people involved in the initiative, successful. Because sometimes the first request is not actually what we wind up designing for. And so there's part of that design thinking hat that you want to put on, part of that curiosity hat, where you might even say after the first meeting, like, thank you, especially more complex requests. This has been really useful. It's given me some initial ideas. Might we be able to circle back? I'm sure I might have some questions. And that gives you the doorway to either have another email, another phone call. I would say I don't do that every time, but in more complex requests, you might need to have a further follow-up meeting. And that then leads to stage 3. What is your timeline, right? What are those core elements? What are the milestones along the way? And what needs to happen in order for things to build, right? Many of you, I think, on today's call have been with us in at least group coaching essentials, probably team coaching essentials, and some of you the practicum, right? As you've seen, design, even as a coach, takes longer. So what are those elements that need to be in the proposal so that you're clear on how much time is this actually going to take? You don't want to shortchange yourself, but yet you don't want to overinflate what time is absolutely necessary for each area. So for example, what is the timeline? Let's say they're asking you to do a group coaching process, work with new leaders for a, we'll call it 3 to 6 month period. Are you building in time and budget for pre-calls? You know that one of our best practices is making sure that we sit down with each group coaching participant to learn about them. Who are you? Yes, this is an organizational initiative, but what do you want to get out of the coaching process? What are your main goals and what are your roles? What do I need to understand about your world? So that is key, as is checking for readiness and coachability. The last thing you want to have happen is taking on an engagement where people are not into this whole piece of work. And so there are instances where the contracting phase can go on for upwards of a year. We had an instance a couple of years ago, conversation after conversation. While it was virtual, it was still taking a lot of time. And because of the moment in time, because of what was happening in organizations, it was sort of like a stop start. I would put in a proposal, then it would have to change. Ultimately, I stepped away from the work because the organization was not ready and it was taking a lot of time. Whether or not that work ever proceeded, I'm not sure, but just be aware that, discernment and knowing and being able to say readiness is here or not. That's a big, big, big issue, but it can be very seductive. When you have a 6-figure proposal on the table, it can feel really good. Like, oh yeah, I can make that happen. $100,000, that's gonna be that's gonna do a lot of good for me, my family, everything else. But you know what? Watch the payoff, watch what you might have to really work with. And for me, as an experienced coach, readiness and coachability is everything. You don't want to get into that trap. So, what is the timeline? And then that's going to help you discern. And again, these may be very distinctive areas. One area that I'm not going into depth on today, but it's like, is this a phased approach, right? Are there different components to this project? And that's part of understanding the request and maybe going back and forth with the organization. Again, the route into proposals can be quite varied. And so you will have to really discern, like, how much time do I put in at a front end? How much is built out in phases as we go? And that may be a conversation that you have together. So I'm going to go back to chat and I just want to see what your questions are. And this is related. So I'm going back from the bottom. So Ivana says, along Rita's line of questioning, could you ask their budget so you can incorporate that in your proposal to keep yourself in the game while honoring your own boundaries? And yes, I would say one of my always questions is, what's your budget range? In understanding the request, like, what are we talking about here? Now, some people will say, oh, we don't have a budget in mind. Others will say, we do have a budget in mind. And if I get the request, we don't have a budget in mind, I will usually say something along the lines of, and again, it depends on the relationship. It's a little bit bold, but I always do say, this is a really important question for me to understand, because in the realm of group and team coaching, we can have, something micro, we can have something more extensive. So if you're not clear on this right now, will you be having any follow-up conversations as a team? And if so, can you let me know? Otherwise, if they say, oh, no, we won't, then I'll say, well, here's the range. We could be looking at this, and it might be, we could be looking at $1,500 or we could be looking at $100,000. When I share that sort of range, then we have a different conversation on the table. And I think it does, with experience, that's going to help you with this second question of what can you offer? Part of that is, of course, showcasing your expertise and experience. don't undervalue, even as a new business owner or in your first few years, don't undervalue what you've done in your career, right? When I started this business 20 years ago, yes, I've got 20 years of experience of potentials realized under my belt, but I didn't have that when I started out. And again, thinking back to those big contracts that I got in my first few years, it really was talking about, here's what I've done in the last few years as I've transitioned out of my former work. And I had done a lot of internal consulting and internal training work. And so I was able to sort of share that. And I was always very upfront, as you know, this business is new, but we are looking at blah, blah, blah. So what do you bring to the table? This is where you'll want to share examples of similar projects while maintaining confidentiality. You'll want to include any testimonials that your past clients have given approval to share. And in today's world of non-disclosures, in today's world of confidentiality, you might not be able to speak to who they are. But for example, I've done work for many years with an organization. I think it's fair to say it's an aeronautics, but it's also a Fortune 50. I will never say what their name is, but every year I probably spend about 20 days, working days of the year in that arena. And it was only about a summer ago, so like the summer before last summer, because we tend to do our work in the summer, where I said, I know that you're not comfortable in me sharing the name, but might we, because we're now sort of 5-6 years into this summer work, might we start sharing a little bit more about what's been happening? And they gave approval. It went through their whole internal sort of legal requirements. And so you're going to want to ask for that with seasoned or, partners that you have. You may not be able to emblazon your website with their names. And that's I think that's a very big cultural difference, perhaps between different countries. Some organizations say, yes, we're so happy to have you share that with the world. Others will say, no, there's a non-disclosure in place and it's a non-disclosure. And you've got to respect that. So as you think about your expertise, your experience, there are many different ways as well beyond a proposal. So for those that are thinking about being proactive, is this where you start writing a white paper on the topic? Is this somewhere where you start doing videos around the topic? And the video doesn't have to be 30 minutes like we're doing today. You've got YouTube shorts, right? Many of you have seen my coaching shorts series that I started in the fall. This quarter, we're also over on TikTok. And TikTok, what I like about TikTok is I could go 3 to 4 minutes. So I could go a little bit longer than the 60 seconds I have in a coaching short. So you'll want to think about how do you build that niche, build that brand recognition. Part of the journey is really with that. So before I go to what do you put in the document, any questions? I'm going to just pause, stop our share for a minute. Any questions at all? It's good to see all these faces. Rita, you've unmuted.
I think you'll probably answer this if you're going through a document, but I've seen proposals that are like way too long. And then I've seen other proposals that don't have enough information. So how do you know when you've hit the happy medium?
Yeah. So again, back to this sort of discussion dialogue with the client or prospective client. What are the elements you'd like me to include in your proposal? Is there something specific you want me to make sure that I include? Now, as a writer, I tend to err on the longer side of things, which may or may not be a good thing, but I always figure I'd rather give them a little bit more information. And of course, my proposals today are a little bit longer than they were before. So it is really cracking that nut. But as you said, Rita, this is a great sort of segue in to this fifth stage of like, what is that professional and well-structured document? So I'm going to take you in now. We've seen these different elements, but I want to take you into some of the core elements of proposals. And again, this is very, very generic. So think about it, but as you go, and this is actually part of a 5-day challenge I did back in 2021 as part of the Standout Virtually element. So we did a whole business building challenge. I will be bringing that back. Stay tuned in May. because in June, we're going to redo the Coaching Business Booster. And I really want to set people up for business success this year. So this piece here comes from the Standout Virtually brand, but here's some elements. You're going to want to think about the more generic. So number one, proposal items. You'll want to have in every proposal, what was the background? Who did you speak to, or who initiated the request? What conversations have you had, and what has been asked for? Okay, so you want to capture that. I know it's like I'm being very detailed, but believe you me, sometimes proposals sit there for 3 months, 6 months. You want to be able to remember 3 or 6 months down the road that you talked to Joe Blow in January of 2024, and the initial request was bullet 1, bullet 2, bullet 3. Include in that front part as well what the history was, or the connection to whatever they're trying to solve the problem around, right? There is a problem, which is why they're initiating a proposal. So what's the problem? Then what are you? Who are you? And also, what is your background? Okay, so what is your background in terms of what you are having to offer? Program elements. And we talked earlier about get clear on the request. So is this all group coaching? If it is, how many group coaching calls? Is it Zoom? Is it Teams? Is it in person? How long? And with a process piece, what other elements need to happen? So I'll use group coaching again. Part of the process is we're going to ensure that there is always a pre-call, right? So I'm going to build in, there will be pre-calls with each of the 10 members. That's going to take a minimum of, might be 2.5, 3 hours or more time. So what is the process, and what are key milestones as you go? At this point, you might be starting to realize, wow, I have a couple questions. I didn't ask that. So as part of your initial meeting, have you asked them, can I reach out to you at any stage if I have any questions? And hopefully they say yes. Now, if you can, in your proposal, you might have some like boilerplate statistics around the problem, right? Maybe you're doing a lot of work around resilience. Why is this topic important, right? So you might have a few factoids. Why is resilience important? What's the cost of not solving resilience or burnout? So what are the key statistics about the problem? And if you have examples of how you solve the problem. So have you done work on other initiatives? Have you done webinars? Have you done individual coaching? Are there any sort of case studies that you can provide around this instance? And when I say case studies, it's what other case studies can you sort of talk about within approval? And that case study might be a bit more detailed than your testimonial, right? So the testimonial is simply, we worked with Jennifer, and Jennifer, it was so great that you did ABC. We can't wait for you to come back again. But you'll want to really pick testimonials over time that represent whatever this initiative is about. So that's sort of the first part. Now, in the offer, I always think of a proposal as 2 parts. So there's like the background, who I am, who we are, what we do, what's the situation. And now we have the offer. And the offer may in fact change every time, right? If you want to work ahead, you can really get some of these boilerplate ideas done. That section 1 of the proposal items, you can start working at that right now, even without a request on the table, just to have it ready. The offer is where we're now providing a number of things, and it may be in a bit of a different order than this. But again, what are you offering? What is the overview of the initiative? i.e. it's 6 months. We're going to be meeting, in chart form. We're going to start month 1, and we're going to have a midpoint, and we're going to have an end of program, and we'll have these group calls, and people will do peer work. So that could be graphical. It could also be written. The more you can make it easy to read, this is a learning point of mine over the years, the easier, the more graphical it is, the better it is for reading and understanding. So in that, what are you offering? And are you offering different options? So I go against the grain, no surprise, because I am myself. I go against the grain. Some business professionals would say you only ever offer one. But because I find our work is very customized, I may give a couple of different options. So for example, this morning I sent out a proposal to an organization that wants 2 90-minute virtual sessions. That is going to give them some initial traction, but I don't like to just leave it at that. I like to do a group follow-up call a month later, 2 months later. So there is that as an option 3. There's also an option 2 in this proposal, because there are some workbooks that we have developed over time that could be licensed to their participants to provide them with ongoing support. So that is an option 2. And so you'll want to think about, how do you present this offer? And I had checked in with the requester when they called. I said, it's great that you want these 2 90-minute conversations. And from experience, we found that it's usually not enough. Typically, people hit tricky issues, which is why we will propose 2, follow-up sessions, like a booster shot. Would you be open to me including that? Oh, what a great idea. Yeah, can you include a bit more information on that? And then I said, of course. We also know that, in this type of conversation, it can be useful to have a bit of a guidebook. Would you be interested in learning more about that? Yes, absolutely. So you do want to preface this with, what is included and why, and what's the details. And then including timelines and milestones. And as I sort of read Harlene's question, what about cancellation and rescheduling? I put this up front because I learned, not in year 1 of my business, but probably in year 7 or 8, especially with team coaching, that I started having teams, also hospital, but a third hospital, who was like, oh, we can't meet. And they'd call like 2 days before. It was not acceptable. We had booked our calendars. We had to travel. My team coaching partner and I were pulling our hair out saying, we really can't do it, but we haven't said anything in our proposals or statement of work to deal with a cancellation or a rescheduling. So you can look around online. I think this is where Google is your best friend, and you can look at what are some cancellation and rescheduling clauses. And there are some industry standards different in, Canada than the US, but you may be able to have a canceling and reschedule charge in the work. So that is the offer section. There may be some other terms and conditions. This is where, again, you'll want to go to your own legal counsel to find out. You may also reach out to other coaches in your local area or your industry to see what else would they include. And then you may have bonus items. So it could be photos or video clips of you and or others. Again, this is where confidentiality comes in. Hopefully over time, you're building up some clips of you in action speaking. Again, with Zoom these days, it's easy to say, hey, here's a presentation of me at, Columbia University talking on group or team coaching. That's pretty impressive, but we do want to build that out as we go. So think about, as you do things, how you harness that. And then as we go, maybe you could develop those case studies I talked about, video clips, and if appropriate, maybe as an addendum or part of the proposal, you include some additional video links, blog links, articles. You'll figure out how much is enough. Don't overdo it, but for $100,000 proposal, you're going to overdo it, right? It's not like you're going to just give 3 pages. So for a shorter proposal, it's going to have just probably quick links, and you'll build that over time. So hopefully this has helped you with like creating that game plan. What can you offer? What's your timeline? How do you showcase your expertise and experience? And then you can really go and structure this. Again, remember in proposal writing, because I found myself in this trap, that tasks expand to the time you give them. I had a proposal maybe a year or 2 ago, and it was a proposal we were not successful with, but it wound up being a 30-page proposal. And I knew it was going to be a lot of work. I didn't have a lot of time, so I just gave it the windows that I could, and I was able to get what baseline was needed. As I looked back at it about 6 months later, I was like, this is actually a really good proposal. And I was able to repurpose elements for other initiatives that then were successful. So I think it's easy to get distraught when you put a lot of work in a proposal and you're not successful. Unfortunately, the concept of ghosting is very real these days. I think what I've noticed in the last 18 months, organizations will reach out, they'll ask for proposals, and they're, I will call it rude, in not even following up. I've even had past partners who have dropped the ball and reached out 12 months later saying, Jennifer, I'm so sorry that I did not follow up. But that's today's business world. There's a lot of not necessarily unethical behavior, but just impolite and unprofessional behavior. So you may need to follow up quite a bit with these. And, just get as granular as you can be as specific as you can, and answer all the questions. Remember, however, anything that you send can be seen in a court of law as a contract, as a written contract. So if you cannot do it, do not put it on paper. If you cannot, complete what you're saying, you've got to go back to that weighing out of like, is this really something I want to put my name behind? Because your professional reputation is everything. And if you can't do it alone, maybe this is where you find other colleagues to partner with who can help you along the way. So I hope you will take a moment and download this. I hope that you enjoyed today's call. We're coming to the end, so just want to see if there are any more questions. Feel free to put up your hand too and ask it right now. Any questions on what we covered, big or small? Yeah, Karen, over to you.
I just wanted to follow up in the question that I put in the chat about doing things on my own initiative. I think that your point about within talking about the timeline around readiness, it really helped me think differently about that. So that instead of having a good conversation with someone and following up with a proposal, it could be following up with kind of more of a summary of what we talked about and what I understand their need is, and an invitation or an offer to follow up with a proposal. So that I found that really, really helpful.
And as a midpoint, and that first conversation might lead you to develop like a 1 or 2 pager on here's how we work, right? You want to have a component of like, what's your philosophy? I called it process under that checklist, but what is your process? Like, as a team coach, I'm not going to shortchange the team coaching process. Either we're doing a team day, which is not team coaching. And so we also need to educate. And that's part of the, what are you willing to invest in? And what are you ready to invest in? So sometimes it's okay when things don't proceed, because you never know. You just really never know. Anyone else with a question? So here's what I want to hear. What's your next step, big or small? Like, who's inspired to go and do things? Rob's got to drop off. Good to see you, Rob. But, let us know in chat, what are you going to do as a result of today's call? Maybe it's writing up a case study. Maybe it's reaching out for a testimonial, right? We don't create an award-winning proposal overnight. Let's remember that, right? Unless we practice it, we are not going to get into it immediately. So anyone want to share what you are committed to doing? All right. Formalizing a conversation I'm having with an organization for group coaching. Excellent. What else? Developing a white paper. Yeah, part of something on my list is doing a number of white papers. Harleen, I'm going to begin by creating a list of people, organizations first that I can target proposals to, and then start a write-up, right? And just remember, you're going to want to gauge unsolicited proposals, and you will get a sense if that's welcomed or not. But having a conversation is always key, right? If people don't know about us, you're unlikely to be on that list of 3 people that they're going to reach out to. And you can get a sense as if you're sort of being thrown in the mix. I had a recent experience. I was like, yeah, we've got these big companies. Okay, so I might not spend quite as much time. Ivana says, following up with someone on the distinction between training versus coaching, or the phased approach to I think a proposal there. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us. I hope this was of interest and value to you. We are going to be back together in a couple of weeks on the very important topic we've also received a lot of requests around, which is feedback and evaluation. And in fact, that question came up last night when I was speaking to these grad students. How do you evaluate group and team coaching? So we're not going to do, the grad level of it, but we'll get you thinking about how do you measure your impact with clients. So thank you. It was good to see so many of you. We hope that you'll come back in a few weeks. Ivana, do you happen to know what our date is? I don't want to put Ivana on this. It's either the 6th or the 13th. So stay tuned, our newsletter. I think that was the 6th. Is it the 6th, Ivana?
It is the 6th.
It is the 6th. So come back on the 6th at 12 noon, roughly 30 to
I
40.
apologize. I'm wrong. It's the 13th, Jen.
It's the
My
13th.
apologies.
Okay. So around Valentine's Day, the day of love. We want to be with our community. Anything you want to mention, Ivana?
I'm just going to share too, we see the value of evaluations, and we're actually going to be bringing like our experience of your feedback in the programs you've taken and how we've integrated that in the 2024 round. Because even as an organization who's been here 20 years, like we want to just model and demonstrate the value and the importance of evaluation forms. So part of the conversation will also be a communication of your feedback and how we've integrated it into the conversation.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a great week. We'll see you hopefully on the 13th of Feb, if not before.
Yeah.
See ya.
Great to see so many familiar faces.
Absolutely. Bye,
Yeah.
everyone.